Okay, welcome. We are so glad to have you here on this Monday evening and um, I guess to see Module 6, Challenging U.S. Centric Models, Building International Solidarity. And we have two amazing facilitators with us tonight, Liz Schwab and Carrie Walling. And I think we just decided before we get started, we're going to just have a minute of just calm and getting centered. So if people want to just roll back those shoulders, put your feet on the floor for a second, put the arms down on the side, close your eyes, and just try to take in a couple of really deep breaths and then release. Try and wash away all of the wonderful things you've been doing today and just be able to come here to this place together that we'll be sitting in and learning and being present. So thank you very much. Okay, well, you can now open your eyes. And I think as a couple of starting off points where we have a respect poster that kind of goes through some of our foundational just ways to connect, because we do want you to be able to be fully present and able to be with us and participate fully. So the respect poster that we've used, or some of the guiding kind of norms, are this idea of our own sense of responsibility and responsibility to others, trying to be empathetic and really deeply listening, to sharing airtime, participating as to the best of your abilities. And kind of, as you know, you all are very enthusiastic and passionate probably about this issue, and that's why you're here this evening. We hope that we'll have good communication. If there's things you don't know about, feel free to check in with the facilitators and ask questions as you need. And then hopefully building a sense of trust here together. So now I'll introduce our two amazing co-facilitators for this evening. And maybe before I even get started, I'll just give a shout out to Cara Anderson, who's also on the call, who really has helped to put this whole training as action series together in terms of implementation. We've had a lot of leaders over the summer with our Edmonds Fellows who've coordinated, but we just want to give a great thank you to Cara for really making this flow so smoothly this season. So first I'll introduce Carrie Booth Walling. She's a director right now of the Human Rights Program at the University of Minnesota, which is a hub of interdisciplinary research, teaching, and community outreach in the field of human rights in the College of Liberal Arts. She's also the director of graduate studies of the Graduate Minor for Human Rights and a faculty member in the Institute of Global Studies and affiliated faculty at the Hubert H. Humphrey School of Public Affairs. She specializes in human rights, human security, transitional justice, UN Security Council, and mass atrocity crimes, and much, much more. And she actually, I think, was responsible for even having us find Cara Anderson as our an Edmonds Fellow when she was actually at Albion College. So now I'll introduce Elizabeth Schwab, or Liz. Is an undergraduate at Boston College studying communications and international studies with a concentration in social justice and ethics. She is a Gabelli Presidential Scholar at Boston College, a National Stamp Scholar, and a McGillicuddy Logue Fellow at Boston College. She has researched ethical volunteering with vulnerable groups while teaching English to Syrian and Ukrainian refugees in Germany. With experience working with New York Times, she specializes in the intersection between journalism and human rights education. So without further ado, I'll have Liz, I think, get us started with this wonderful session. So thank you all for being here tonight.
Thank you, Christy, for the very lovely introductions and warm-up activity too. So just to get us started, I thought it would be good to introduce ourselves to each other. So if you can either write in the chat or if anyone wants to share with the group, I know there's only a couple of us. So the first is what's your name, the second is where you're from, and then the third is what does international solidarity mean to you? So I'll put that in the chat too. If anyone wants to share out, feel free. And I also can start, well, as you know, my name is Liz or Elizabeth, either is fine. I'm originally from New York. And for me, international solidarity means standing with and for others. That's something that we say at Boston College, and I think that it embodies solidarity really well. Does anyone want to share out to the group? If not, we can also do it in the chat. I love the responses so far. Community at the international level. It means to stand up for what is right no matter where someone lives. Basic human dignity and rights. 100% agree. Um, oh, Denver, nice. Upholding human rights equitably and globally. Also love that. All right. Awesome. International solidarity to me means a commitment to cooperation, securing human rights, and developing a global peacetime economy. I really like the last bit. Global peacetime economy. That's great. Being inspired to act with collective collaborators and coming together along across borders. Those are all really awesome ideas, and I think that it sounds like you guys are already ahead of the game, and I think it sets the stage for what we're going to talk about today really well. So I'll hand it off to Carrie to get us started on our content discussion in the first part of the event tonight.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here, and to our organizers. It's a great honor to be with you all here tonight. So based on your answers, I think you have a pretty good idea already of what international solidarity is. But so I decided to dig in a little bit to look at what does the UN say international solidarity is, and how does this concept fit within the United Nations? So back in 2005, the UN General Assembly identified international solidarity as, quote, a universal and fundamental value to guide our relations in the 21st century. And they decided that the 20th of December of every year should be celebrated as International Human Solidarity Day, for a variety of reasons, including, I really love this phrase, celebrating unity and diversity. And I love the idea of linking that we can be unified, we can create unity, but it doesn't mean sameness, right? That we can be unified while respecting diversity and celebrating it. And also to raise awareness about solidarity. We have a special procedure mandate holder, which is an independent human rights expert appointed by the Human Rights Council on human rights and international solidarity. And this individual, this expert, is job description essentially includes encouraging civil society to express, quote, transformative empathy for vulnerable people in other countries, to create a social and international order for all human rights to be realized, and to eliminate causes of asymmetries and inequities between states and within states. And so these ideas seem very consistent with the things that you have put into the chat. There's also a declaration on the right to international solidarity as well. And so then I looked at like, how does the UN actually define solidarity? Not just kind of to celebrate it and say it needs to be an important part of how we do human rights work. And on the screen here, these are the definitions. So the first, that it's an expression of consciousness about the interconnectedness of peoples and generations. I really love that. I think about Christy's comment in the chat about being on Dakota homelands. And one of the things that Indigenous folks here in Minnesota always talk about is the commitment to 7 generations, right? So that we are interconnected to other people at our moment in time, but those who come before and after us as well. That we also are thinking about shared agency and responsibility to cooperate with each other to address common challenges and protect global public goods, which actually reminds me of the comment in the chat about what was it, the peaceful and just kind of global economy. So global public goods are the kinds of things that are available to everyone and can be enjoyed by everyone. They benefit all citizens of the world. And if you look at this slide, have access to the slide later, you can follow that and get a definition there too from the IMF. But wondering if people are willing to put in the chat, what do you think are some examples of global public goods? Like, what do you think of as a global public good? Or you can unmute and speak too. That's what are these global public goods that we should be protecting together as part of our human rights movement? Okay, here we go. Art, land, air, water, food. Yeah, right. Yeah, just in thinking about our environment in general, sanitation. All right, excellent. Thank you, everyone. Okay, so the UN Declaration actually talks about international solidarity as having 3 different components that we can engage in preventive solidarity, which is the idea that we're taking this proactive action to safeguard and enhance the fulfillment of human rights for everyone, right? So that it's very much what human rights education, I think, is about too, right? This idea of trying to create a culture, a human rights culture in which human rights can thrive. There's also reactive solidarity, which is responding to human rights violations, responding to human rights challenges and other human rights emergencies and the ways that we need to support each other. Like that standing with and for, that was a good example. And then this third area they talk about is international cooperation in the human rights field. And so this is the idea of working together with common but differentiated responsibilities to ensure the full realization of rights and duties under international law, so that we have this responsibility to hold each other accountable and to all be working in collaboration, but recognizing that the way we do so is equitable, but not necessarily equal, right? We have different responsibilities in this area. There's other common definitions. So these are kind of the more dictionary definitions that we get around solidarity, but a lot of commonality of unity, of feeling, mutual support, kind of an awareness of shared interests, objectives, and standards, community, cooperation, unity. I have to say, I think I have preference for the definitions that you all put in the chat that have more kind of human, I think, feeling and connection as well. So one of the things we wanted to talk about is the need for those of us who are in the United States and engaged in human rights to really think about how we're situated in our own communities, but also how we're situated in the human rights movement internationally. And that to really engage in international solidarity may mean abandoning some ways we may have been socialized to think about human rights in ways that really focus on the U.S. approach to human rights. And so while some of these are probably not unique to the United States and might be common to states in general, some of them might be more pronounced in the U.S. than other places. So what are some of these tendencies? So one that's pretty common among states, this was written in one of the International Human Solidarity reports by the independent expert, is that oftentimes we focus too much on our own national, leaders focus on their own national audience and the well-being of their own nationals rather than shared responsibility for global crises. And so we can think about the global pandemic, we can think about the refugee and migration crisis, and we can think about climate and how these are all examples of crises that affect us all and require us to work together. A U.S. centric approach often focuses on how human rights connects to our own interests. And that sometimes means that we apply those standards differently between our friends and our rivals or enemies. We also have a preference for human rights that conform to our culture rather than challenge or push our culture. So, for example, in the US context, there is much privileging of political and civil rights and a dismissal in many cases of social, economic, and cultural rights. So we're not always accepting of all rights, or our government's not accepting of all rights. And I put the CRC because the Convention on the Rights of the Child is an example of a convention that the US does not participate in. We also have inconsistent engagement with human rights institutions, but when we are engaged, we expect to be in the leadership role. So when we show up, we want to kind of drive and think we have the right answers and the right way of doing things, and that our interpretation of human rights and our approach to human rights change is the model. And so there can be some hubris in this kind of American exceptionalism approach. The other thing that can sometimes happen is sometimes US approaches can kind of, it can be driven from a good place, but wants to kind of swoop in and rescue and save and without paying attention to the needs and the expertise of the people who are really at the center. And so really human rights should be about an empowerment model and a focus on a justice approach to human rights and not a rescue approach to human rights or merely a charitable approach. So these are some tendencies. It doesn't mean that there aren't good ways that the US can and American citizens participate in the human rights movement, but that these are some of the tendencies that we want to be mindful of and not reproduce. And so instead, we want to think about, what does solidarity look like in human rights work? How can we do so in ways that really celebrate the intentions of the human rights movement, the Human Rights Project, and the commitment to international solidarity. And this is an incomplete list, so I'm going to invite you all to add. In fact, we're going to ask you to add more as we go. But one is to accept the interdependence of all rights and the value of all rights, and not to just value some as being more important than others. Thinking about being a team player and making sure that when we're involved in human rights change, that we follow the lead of the people who are best placed to understand and respond to those human rights violations. And so that means respecting local expertise, indigenous knowledge, centering the needs, experiences, and expertise of the people whose rights are under threat, as well as local actors, that we participate in ways that we're thinking about that idea of partnership and how we empower and support each other, that we do have shared interests, we think about common good, but that when we engage in partnerships, we want to make sure that they are respectful and that they are mutually beneficial, that they're not exploitative, and that I think of international solidarity around human rights as an attempt to be radically inclusive and equitable and just in creating a movement for social change. So I'm going to pass it to Liz because Liz is going to give us some examples of international solidarity approaches in action from youth leaders.
Yes, well, thank you for the wonderful presentation, Carrie. Oh, we can go to the next slide also. So for the next section, I'm going to run through two different case studies that I think really exemplify what we just talked through. And for me, they're also like familiar examples, so it might give you more of an idea about how to do so like tangibly in a material way. So the first one is a climate change based study. And I think by nature, climate change is a global crisis that affects us all, not equally, which we'll also get to. But international solidarity is it's essential in addressing the climate crisis because of that. It requires cooperation across borders, and seeing each other as more than data points across borders as well. So I chose Fridays for Future, which I think is a really key example of how young people specifically have mobilized to globally defend like climate action and make significant change. So I'm sure some of you might be familiar with it, but just for background information, so Fridays for Future was founded by Greta Thunberg in 2018, and she started the movement after she started a climate strike outside the Swedish parliament. And since then, it gained a lot of media attention, and the movement really spread quickly worldwide. And there were over 150 different countries with climate strikes very shortly after. Millions of people have participated in the protests for this organization, and they've had a lot of influence on public discourse and different climate policies, which I'm sure you all might have heard of as well. We can go to the next slide. So as to how Fridays for Future is a good model for international solidarity specifically, first, the movement is very decentralized and it's completely it's youth-led mainly, and now I would say all ages participate, but it really allows for diverse participation from countries all over the world. In 2019, for example, the global climate strike drew about 7.6 million participants from 185 different countries. So this kind of gives you an idea of how international the mobilization was. And another reason why I think this organization is a great example of international solidarity is that it's really focused on climate justice, which is also very much so interlinked with solidarity. So Fridays for Future really works to exemplify voices from the global south, and countries that are like most vulnerable to climate change and face the most severe consequences. Whether that's in Africa or the Pacific Islands, it really makes sure it is an organization that includes all voices and stands with others, and looks outside of one's own country. So activists from Africa, the Pacific Islands, and other regions are then given these platforms or this platform to share their experience, and then also help work with each other to advocate for climate solutions. Another aspect of their organization is that they pressure international institutions like the UN and the EU to have stronger climate policies and hold more governments accountable. So again, having like the decentralized approach, which also started with her and the Swedish government. And it also supports different activists who might face like legal threats or oppression as well. So how can you all get involved? That was something I found myself asking. I remember when I first came across this movement. So they have a really cool feature. The link is in the slides, but we'll also send it to you all after. But essentially, you can join a Fridays for Future strike in your community, or you can start one if it does not exist. I was looking at the map, and there's a couple on the East Coast, not as many on the West Coast, but if you're interested in starting your own, you definitely can. And essentially, the map is a way for you to find others who already have started that process. So I highly recommend looking into it. And then another thing to do is, of course, engage with climate policy and contact representatives and advocate for climate legislation that you care about in your on local levels, but also on global levels. And then, of course, use social media to spread awareness and try and support climate movements. It's something we can all do very easily. And a great way to do so is through the Fridays for Future has a hashtag that's gained a lot of traction. So that's also a great way to see what people are doing in the US and then also outside of the US as well. You can go to the next slide. So I wanted to share another resource that I came across myself. I was a delegate at COP29, which is the global climate conference that the UN holds every year. It's where they talk about the Paris Agreement and other global climate, like international treaties, essentially. And a part of one group that was there is called Youngo. So they're the official youth constituency of the UNFCCC. UNFCCC. It's a really long name. Yeah, the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. And it's essentially a global network. It connects youth activists and organizations working on climate policy with each other and then also to these global conferences. So it is open to anyone under 35 since it is a youth group. And it's really easy to join, which I also didn't know. I myself am a member, but you don't need to be affiliated with the UN or you don't have to be selected by a staff member or anything like that. You essentially fill out the participation, like membership form, which is on the doc, and we will also send that out to you all. But essentially the way it works is anyone can fill out the form as long as you meet the youth requirement, and they send you links to onboarding calls, and then you attend an onboarding call, and then you're officially part of Youngo and the network. So what does that mean exactly? Well, you'll get different emails about the latest global climate policies, how youth are getting involved. The level of involvement you want to get in is also super you can keep applying for things until you get to a place where you could sit in on negotiation rooms and make change and represent Youngo as a group. Or you can also attend different working groups. There's a human rights working group, but there's also a bunch of other ones like food, water, national security, things like that. So I highly, highly recommend. I think this is a great way also to express international solidarity since you're working with people from all different countries. And for me, it was really eye-opening since it wasn't run by the US or anything like that. So I highly recommend. Yes, and I would say, I know that there's some educators in the room. Definitely share this, or I would encourage you to share it with anyone you know who might be under 35. It's a great way to get involved, not only in the UN process, but just to be more exposed to what's going on with climate change policy in general. So just I guess to sum up that the climate example. So the Fridays for Future and also Youngo and all these different groups, it's very youth activist focused, but I think it's also important to note that they definitely have been shaping global conversations like climate change. And this has really strengthened movements and ensures diverse voices are heard, even up to global coordination. So I just want to reinforce that anyone can really get involved. I think that's an important component of international solidarity too. So we can go to the next case study. So the second one, I wanted to focus on women's rights and women's education. So the next case study that we're going to go to is on education as being a fundamental human right, yet as we all probably know, millions of women and girls worldwide face barriers to having quality schooling, whether that's due to poverty, gender discrimination, or different systemic inequalities. And the US typically does engage in education-related human rights efforts, but many tend to operate through this like Western aid model that we had talked about rather than it being very like true international solidarity. So today we're going to talk about CAMFED, which I think is a wonderful example um, of how to combat that. It stands for Campaign for Female Education, and it's an African-led movement that I think really exemplifies international solidarity in action. So, yeah, as we said, it kind of gets away from the idea that global education is a charity issue, like placing Western organizations as like the solution. And it looks more towards like gender equality and ways that we can recognize leadership and agency of local communities and solving their own challenges rather than imposing different solutions. So rather than top-down investments, I think this is a really good example of how like bottom-up organizations and movements can really create significant change. So yeah, as you can see on the slide, CAMFED, it stands for Campaign for Female Education. It was founded in 1993, so a little bit ago, and it operates in Zimbabwe, Zambia, Ghana, Tanzania, and Malawi. And it essentially directly supports girls by providing different scholarships, school materials, and also different mentorship programs that are education based. And a really core part of their success, I think, is their network and their network of alumni who actually return to their communities that they worked with to help support the next generation of students, which is also another component of international solidarity, is connecting youth with older populations. So yeah, like I was saying, it's a little bit different than a lot of Western-led education initiatives in that it ensures local women are leading the movement and shaping policies and all of the education program. And as of today, they have helped 5.7 million children access education. And I think, like I said, it really just shows a really successful grassroots-led movement. You can go to the next slide. So I think there were 4 things that I pulled out from their program. They do a lot of different things, but I thought I would focus on 4. So the first one is community-led solutions. Like I said, the scholars and the people who work for the program are local populations. And like I said, they're sometimes scholars that return to their communities as mentors, educators, and definitely as role models, and I think as examples of success as well. And then because of that, they have this like self-sustaining development model. So they're not really relying on external organizations, and they're using alumni and making the movement self-sustaining by engaging local populations that really care about this. And then for the next part, they also do work with international governments and businesses and organizations. And they do so in a way that they are still the primary decision makers and ones in charge of the programs and everything. So it's a good balance, I think. And then also economic empowerment. The program provides financial literacy, training, and different entrepreneurship programs. So that again kind of just like self-sustains the organization itself. If you go to the next slide. So as to how we all can get involved, whether students or educators, first one is educate yourself and others. So I think a really great way, and we'll get to this, is to learn about grassroots movements in different regions and following more like local activists, whether that's in a city or a specific town, reading international news, studying different case studies. Something I started to do was to attend different webinars on different global human rights issues that aren't based in the US. So like looking in the specific country that you're interested in and seeing if they have any programs. Also engaging with discussions with international scholars, activists, and different communities. And then with that, of course, recognizing and respecting the local leadership. I think that's the theme of this organization, and I think it's really important, rather than assuming that an external intervention is the best solution. The second one is to support locally led women's rights initiatives. So that's a hashtag that they use. And also, I know a lot of different ones, including UN Women. They helped start this global campaign called For All Women and Girls. That's really wonderful. And then lastly, my last suggestion, and I think a good way to get involved, is to volunteer work in women's rights organizations. You can go to the next slide. So I know that that can seem like daunting. I know that that's also often a solution that's posed. So what I made a list of ones that have relative, kind of like Youngo, where it's pretty easy to get involved, whether that's just like filling out a form or adding your email and things like that. So these are a couple of different ones that I think are helpful. I actually had a friend who did Girls Who Code and she loved it. She Should Run is also a wonderful one. And then OWID as well. They have calls for participants listed really often, and they like updated a lot. I know a lot of the larger websites too might not have like positions and things that are updated frequently. So that's one that I think is also really helpful. And yeah, I think, well, of course, we're gonna send all of the links in the slides to you all afterwards, so that you can have it on hand. So that was so those were two primary examples of how we can express international solidarity. And this is, I think, a process and something that can be done across different issues. It does not just have to be like climate change and women's education. So the next thing that we're going to do in our program is a mapping activity. So essentially, this is going to be a way for us to think about and reflect on how we might connect with others, and good action items so that you can leave the Zoom today feeling like you have a next step. So I'm going to share a link to Miro, and it's kind of like Jamboard if any of you have used it before. But it is gonna, if you open the link, also if anyone has troubles, please let me know. But if you open the link, it should show up, an image of a map should show up. And essentially what we're gonna have everyone do today is like add your name and your home location, and then pick a human rights issue or movement in another part of the world that you feel connected to, or if you can't think of one off the top of your head, an area or a place that you want to learn more about and like what human rights issues or possibly solutions are going on there. And you're just going to draw a line. There should be a little tool on the side that allows you to do that. So we're going to do that first, and then we'll come back and while you're doing this, start to think about how your rights might be connected with the place that you're drawing the line to. Try and think about different similarities too. So I'll let you guys do that for a few seconds, a couple minutes. Hopefully it works. If anyone is having trouble, let me know. Okay, awesome. It looks like people are on there. So if you look on the side, on the left sidebar, you should see the little pencil, and that's how you can draw across different places. And there's also text if you want to add your name, and let's see. I'm gonna paste the instructions I just said too in the chat. But yeah, so add your name, location if you want, or just your location, whatever you prefer. And then the human rights movement you want to learn more about or care about.
And I don't see the pencil. I see sticky notes. Where can I find the pencil again? Or should it just be the sticky note?
Liz,
Does anyone else see it? Is it showing up?
can you all see the share? Is this on the shared screen or is it still on the slide?
It's
Or
on the
can you
shared
see?
screen.
Okay. So is it over here where the pencil?
Yes. Oh, let's see.
There's
Okay,
also
yeah, I
this
think you have
plus,
to click
so
on the tools to find the
yeah, click on
pencil.
that.
Oh, okay, I tried doing, okay,
There
the
you
tool,
are.
yeah.
You see, and then there's a
Oh, I
There
see
you
a
pen.
go.
pen.
Yeah.
Is it a pen?
Yep.
Got
Yes. Yeah,
it. Okay,
that
I'm
should
with you.
be it.
Here.
Oh, there we go. Yeah. Okay, it's looking like we've gotten some pencils on there. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Um,
And then do you like this idea? I like how Christy has
Oh, ah!
the sticky note. Oh,
yes, yeah. I think if that's easy for everyone too, that could be great. Maybe I know that it might there might be some overlapping, so maybe on just like the left side of the screen, like your name and place, and then the place you chose. We'll also talk about it after, so no worries if that feature doesn't work either. And also the sticky note should be on the sidebar as well. It looks like the page above the different shapes on the left. This is looking great, everyone. And then while you're adding, so just something to reflect on, and then we'll share in a second. But try and think about what potential links there are between your region, um, an issue, and the community that you do live in.
actually really fun to watch everybody put their things on the map and
That's exactly what I'm doing right now. These are all wonderful. We'll give it like maybe one more minute and then we'll also share in a second. So no worries if you didn't get your sticky note on there. Okay, awesome. Um, I think we will. It looks like most are on here. Um, I think we'll start with our first question that we can talk through as a group. But just off the bat, what do you all, just thinking it can be very general, what are the potential links you see between the region and or the issue that you mark down and the community that you live in? We can either, you can like say out in the discussion, or you can also write it in the chat too. I will also paste that in the chat as well.
I think you may have to read out some things because it's hard to read other people's. I don't know if
Sure.
others are having that challenge.
Yes.
I can read things in the chat if they come, or do you want me to
Oh,
read
there,
off the
perfect.
map?
Yes. Yeah, that would be great.
Awesome.
Yeah, so what we're seeing on the map, we have rights respecting schools and child-friendly cities with UNICEF, Women, Life, Freedom in Iran, the Youth Symposium on Human Rights for Undergrads. It looks like that is in Australia. Educational access for children in the Democratic Republic of Congo or who are heavily impacted by child labor, and migration and migrant and refugee students in my locality. So it was making this as an example of responding to Liz's question about the link between those spaces and thinking about migrant and refugee students and locally. Let's see. Those are the ones I could read. Let me see if I can.
Yeah, I also just got a chat from Moira. She said there's always a need for supporting children and trauma responses. That is very true.
Excellent. I put in the chat Jordan and the New Tactics and Human Rights Project, which is has offices here and there. And what I love about the work that this organization does is learning from each other, from activists in the movement around the world on tactics that have been successful in making human rights change. And so I love this idea in terms of international solidarity and thinking about how we all can learn from each other. And Liz talked about collaboration, not domination, and bottom-up grassroots. And this is a group, an organization that's grassroots. You see migration and immigration policy, refugee and migration policies are showing up there as well.
That looks awesome. Thank you for reading those out as well. So I guess we can bring it back to the group. We can talk through some like discussion questions. And well, I would also just like hearing those. I would love to learn more about why you guys like chose this specific region, or why you felt drawn to it. So I'm gonna paste some questions in the chat as a guideline, but if anyone wants to share why you like chose your country or movement, why you felt drawn to it, and then we'll talk through some solutions on how you can connect more with the area. But does anyone want to share like why they chose their movement or place specifically, or why you were drawn to it? You can also write it in the chat too. I'll read out what Marielle wrote. Patriarchy is a global system of oppression, and the women of Iran have tremendous leadership, bravery, and sacrifice, pushing back against a system that harms us all in similar and different ways and to various degrees. I honestly don't think we can thank them enough. Bless the women of Iran. I agree. It's beautifully said. Does anyone else want to share out? Christy, do you want to share?
I was going to call on Christy or
I'm very
Cara.
curious.
Well, I mean, the couple of ones that I had put, actually, I've been working with. So I've been working on that Child-Friendly Cities Initiative, UNICEF here in Minneapolis. But then I was very fortunate to um, get work with a colleague from the University of Iceland who was trying to launch a human rights education course. And so I was able to get a Fulbright to go work and collaborate with her. And then I started learning while there about more of the Rights Respecting Schools initiative and their initiative on the child-friendly cities, or across, I guess, Iceland as well. So that's been kind of one of the movements. And my other one that I wrote, I'd been collaborating with someone on a faculty from South Africa and then in Australia, and they wanted to do a youth symposium to try and get undergrads more experience in presenting. And so then we did some press kind of a symposium that they were able to investigate each other's countries, or I mean their own countries they presented on, and then the various human rights concerns, which it actually worked really well, but it inspired me.
That sounds incredible. Yeah, Kara, go ahead.
Yeah, I didn't identify like a specific organization, but I mentioned the Ukraine, like the conflict that's going on there. So that broke out my freshman year, and it kind of aligned with as I was getting into kind of these issues of international human rights and like war crimes. And so it's something I've been able to follow kind of from the beginning and done some research on in different classes and see like the vast amount of human rights abuses that are kind of going on there and how many people have really been impacted. And then it really does also show kind of like that global connection, because the US has been very involved in sending aid. And right now there's different talks about trying to bring it to an end, with some controversy over how certain leaders are going about doing that, and how things are kind of playing out right now is interesting to follow along with, and sad to see all of the pain and suffering that's going on there.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. I also actually was one of the primary ways in which I was introduced to human rights was through the conflict as well, where it was around the same time as being in college and like hearing those conversations for the first time. So thank you for sharing. I definitely resonate with that.
Let's see, some other countries are Algeria has been marked, United Kingdom has been marked, as well as just other places that people are connecting to and with.
That's wonderful. Does anyone else want to share why they chose their country? If not, we can also move on to the next section. Let's see. So for the next part, so thinking about all of the places that you all marked and all the issues that you felt connected to, we thought a really great way to actually feel like you're leaving this call with like a call to action. We had the idea of creating a Google Doc, which I will share in the chat right now. So if you open it, you'll see different like connections. Also, if there aren't enough, feel free to add another one. But we were thinking that we could each write one way to express support or solidarity to that place that you had drawn the line to. So this could be like following different activists in the region. It could be sharing their campaigns. It could be fundraising in the US. It could be translating resources. Oh, let me see. Let me make sure everyone has access. Okay, wait, if everyone refreshes their doc, it should work now. That you can edit. If anyone has troubles, let me know. Does that work? Okay, awesome. So if you want to write down your origin place, so where you're coming from, the place and area that you chose, and then also one action item. And this could be something really small, really simple, just so that we have a little collection between all of us. Also, if there aren't enough, we can create more too. I'm not sure how many we have. These look great. I'll give it like another 2 minutes if you guys can add anything. This is looking great, everyone. Okay, we'll take like 1 more minute and then we will come back together and share out what our action items are. We'll feel inspired by each other, I think, just reading through them now. Awesome, we'll give it like 30 more seconds. Okay, well, while we have some people wrapping up, no rush at all, no worries. I'm gonna share out what I wrote first, and then we can have anyone else who wants to join in and share what their action item was. You can just like read out your bullet. That would be wonderful. So to start, I'm originally from New York, like I said, and I chose Morocco. I had been there 2 summers ago now, but I had gotten really interested in women's rights there, and it's something that I honestly wish I had explored more after I left. But I really didn't, I guess, get the chance to put in the time. So my action item was to join a local Zoom for a like women's rights organization there. I do have some French, so if it was in French, that would be ideal. That'd be really awesome. So that was my one bullet that I'm hoping to do after this Zoom. Does anyone else want to share what they had down as their action point?
I can share mine. So I'm not teaching right now. So I think that I would maybe be a little bit or have more access to district-wide resources on how to protect our students. But I think that that's something that I really just need to make happen myself because I am substituting, and regardless, I just want to be more up to speed on migrant rights. And I mean, we've had ICE raids happening here in Denver. So, anyways, I want to be more up on that. But in the meantime, in connection to educational access in DRC, I think that something that I have tried really hard to do is ensure that I boycott the companies that are contributing to the issue in the first place, and helping spread awareness on which companies those are and how they're getting around some of the, um, um, I guess, like human rights obligations when it comes to ethnical employment. So anyway, yeah, that's what I got.
Thank you so much. I think that's a great specific, and I think that's something that's definitely doable. So thank you for sharing. Um, does anyone else want to share what they had written down? You could also write it in the chat too. That also works. If not, maybe Carrie, we can just read through what people had written as well. But
And one thing that I noticed was references to contacting elected officials or writing what we call advocacy letters to elected leaders. And I just want to lift that up as being something that's extremely important. And even picking up the phone and just making a call and leaving a voicemail at your elected official's office, particularly if you're disagreeing with policies. So like on the shared document, one of the words in reference to Ukraine and continuing U.S. support for Ukraine, and someone else made references to aid, and we know there've been serious U.S. AID cuts. And so I think those are examples that people have written about where you can write, you can email, you can call, but it's important to say something. And express our outrage and not just hold it internally. And I can say that many of my colleagues have been really busy writing advocacy letters lately on our own campuses as well as to other places. And so this is a common method of engagement in a democracy. So I also loved there was a suggestion in here to learn more about women life freedom by reading the graphic novel, which I didn't know had been created. So thank you for sharing that resource. This is the author who wrote Persepolis.
oh wow, that looks really interesting.
I shared a link to the tactical database that I mentioned, which is newtactics.org. Oh, see, but Christy is so much better. She actually shared an actual link. So,
The child-friendly cities.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you, Christy, for that.
raising funds. People have listed joining Zoom from local organizations. So, learning about and getting engaged with organizations and other places. So, those are some great action items.
Yes, wonderful. And I think whoever chose the European Union too, following European agencies, that's a really great way. As well as politicians within the country, not only within the US. I think that's something that we tend to overlook, but it's also a great way to get involved. Yeah, so thank you all for sharing and writing in those action items. We'll share the doc and like everything with you towards the end. So if you want to go back and look at what you had written,
well, and I just asked Danielle, and maybe I'll call her in to explain something that she's working on that I think ties really nicely with this kind of advocacy work.
Oh yeah, sure.
Yeah, so I had just quickly mentioned that in the way of political advocacy and using some of the mechanisms that already exist, like reaching out to our local politicians, we could also utilize the UPR, which is coming up for the United States, assuming that we participate, which I think we will, but regardless, and it could be a really great way to provide recommendations on the human rights issues of your passion to nations, to any UN member nation. So I just think that that's a really great opportunity, but it's also one that is still, even though I've been looking into the process for a good little while now, is still very daunting and can be tricky. So I wanted to try and throw together like a little one pager. It's a work in progress, but I'm going to toss a little link to that in the chat. So feel free to to take a peek at that. There's already like some comments on the side. So if there's anything that you see that you think that I could add, or a better way to go about something, like again, this is a work in progress. So give me feedback as well if you'd like, but I'll drop that in the chat.
Thank you so much. That would be
And I
wonderful.
know HRE USA is actually working to try and get a submission in. I think the deadline's fast approaching on April 7th for the first step, and then the US will be in front of the council November 10th. But there'll be a lot of activities that people could potentially get involved in up until then too.
Great. Well, as we begin to wrap up here, one way we thought would be nice to close is to, we're a small enough group that rather than breaking into small groups, we thought we could do this together, but to think about how our thinking about international solidarity may have expanded. Do you have any new or additional thoughts about how you think we should define international solidarity? And related to that is what we've already started, but thinking about what are acts of solidarity that we can actually engage in. And so already through the Google document, you shared one related to the mapping exercise, but we can think even more broadly. You don't have to only think about the country that you chose, but so let's revisit, what do we think of international solidarity? And are there acts of international solidarity that we can do? And we can put them in the chat and or just unmute or raise your hand, and happy to have you speak. Oh, Kara, please go ahead.
So we've talked some about like advocacy actions, like contacting decision makers, but then I was also thinking about doing research on like conflicts or other human rights issues in other countries, especially those that don't get the mainstream like media attention here in the US, and just trying to be aware of what actually is going on around the world that we might not know about, to make sure that we know like what these problems are and are trying to really be knowledgeable on what's happening.
Thanks, Kara. I think the root of all good advocacy is research. So great suggestion there. Jen also wrote in the chat that participating in forums like this is an important action. I agree, Jen, and I think in these kind of moments, also gathering with like-minded people to share ideas, to strengthen and uplift each other, particularly in moments where things might feel really difficult, that's really powerful, because part of being effective is finding ways to refresh and support each other, or as Liz said, standing with and standing for. And I guess that's one that I would give, is don't overlook the very simple acts of treating people with kindness and dignity right now in moments where people in our communities are being attacked and experiencing real harm.
Yeah, just to jump off of that, so standing with and for others is a part of, so I go to BC, and that's a part of one of their mottos. But in the sense that it's a motto, it kind of trickles down to all layers. So they're really big on surface, and that happens domestically, but I also think that that can be applied elsewhere. Just the value of like seeing each other as human beings and advocating for each other, as a friend. Yeah. Oh, okay. So we have Moira had sent in a message. In my past experience as a child life specialist, it was paramount to work to advocate for families of a hospitalized child during times when a cultural belief may have gone up against a doctor's treatment plan. This applies worldwide. Advocacy is so important. I definitely agree. It's a really powerful story too. Thank you.
Wise person said something to me today of while we try to think about and plan kind of what to do to tackle what our contribution can be to human rights, that we should also just be aware of the small opportunities that present themselves, the things that appear before us, that it doesn't always have to be big and radical kinds of change, but the ways in which we can use our own skills and the own communities that we're a part of to make change. So sometimes thinking small can really have a really big dramatic impact. And I want to point out that Danielle shared the UPR toolkit as well. And then Jen shared that, yes, the big radical options make it harder to decide what to put your efforts towards. I feel that same way. I'm interested in everything. I want to do everything. And then I can find myself kind of stuck. Liz, do you have some final thoughts or reflections about international solidarity and what it means to you?
Yeah. I'll say, well, first off, I definitely learned a lot from you all with your action items and what you're interested in. Thinking about like talking with representatives within within the country, not just in the US, is something that I don't think I'd really thought about before. And that's just one example of the many different reflections that I learned from you all. So I guess just to wrap up, I wanted to say like thank you all. I know that a lot of the presentation was focused on like youth groups and different ways you could like volunteer and things like that. But I think our discussion also shows that, and I think that's something that's really important to keep in mind, is that it can be something very small and something very local. And I think that that was what the purpose, or I hope the purpose of the activity was, to think about your own community as well, not only just others, like finding that balance. So yes, thank you all for sharing everything. I really, really appreciated it. And let's see. Yeah, so again, so we'll just some like logistical things. So for the case studies, I know I had some links about ways you can get involved. We're gonna collect those, and then also we're gonna take the action items that you all had written and put those on all on the same document so that they're not all over the place and you have to open a bunch of different links. And then also I think Carrie mentioned this, but Danielle, I saw that you dropped the link as well. We can also add that to the document too, so everyone has access to it after the Zoom. Yeah, so thank you all so much for joining and participating. We really appreciate it. Like I said, I learned a lot, and I'm sure everyone else in this room learned a lot too. And I just want to echo that. I think, especially during this time, that gathering together and having these conversations about human rights and also education, of course, with each other is something really valuable. And it reminds me of something that Carrie said just a couple of minutes ago, that like really small actions can have a huge difference. I think even just the act of talking about these things with other people can make a huge difference in their day, just given the climate and everything. I find this to be a really safe space, and I hope that it is for everyone else on the call as well. So with that, I will hand it over to Christy to do our final closing. I don't know if Carrie, if you have anything else you wanted to share.
No, just thank you so much. And, thanks to Liz for such a beautiful presentation. And thank you all for sharing your wonderful definitions of solidarity and your ideas of inspiration, and to Cara and Christy for their organizations. So thank you, everyone. And Christy, give us the closing final word.
Oh, the final word. I don't know. I would just want everyone, I think we all want to just say thank you for creating this wonderful space, Liz and Carrie, for us tonight to kind of dive into really important things around how do we keep hope going? How do we think about connections with others as we're trying to make sense of a lot of things on our own? And I do think this global connection is really powerful. So I don't know if others want to throw out any words into, how you're feeling. I have dropped in a really short survey that we're hoping you don't mind completing so that we can continue to both improve our offerings to you and thinking about other kind of training as action series sessions we may do. I will drop in also here, which I didn't tease up, but some information on the Edmonds Fellowship grants. We know today we've just opened up our fellowships for the summer, so that hopefully, please spread the word if you're interested. Yeah, you can talk to Kara. She's been an Edmonds Fellow herself, and actually, you can go on to our podcast. We actually interviewed a number of Edmonds Fellows, and so they were able to kind of give a better insights even on the Edmonds Fellowship as a whole. So that's just one push if you know of anyone interested. But also there's Liz was also on a recent podcast, so we are really trying to bring young voices into our Human Rights Education Now podcasts as kind of looking forward, because we really do think that the intergenerational work is so crucial. So thank you very much for attending, and we're just so grateful for all of you sharing your time and energy and thoughts and all the good work that you're doing. So if you have any questions, and then our next session, oops, I almost forgot to plug. Our next session will be, I've got too many tabs open. There we go. Our next session will be Module 7, Big Actions, Big Feelings, Practical Empathy in Human Rights. And that session, it's also on our website. So we'll hopefully on March 10th, you will be able to join us for this as well. So thank you again for your time. And I will
Sounds great.
stop recording.